In today's video, I'll be doing a walkthrough of the beta release of the new Spartan Forge app, talking about the features and what to expect moving forward. Spartan Forge released a deer movement prediction service last fall on their website, which was based on machine learning principles and a lot of data from collared deer studies across the country. The app version adds on better weather forecasting and historical information, a journaling feature, and a map, all to help aid in hunt planning. Releasing initially in beta will allow people to download the app and start using it, but just as importantly, we kind of stress test the influx of additional users before transitioning to production. I'll start with the forecast tab, since it's sort of the bread and butter for what Spartan Forge offers. You can either search a location on the search bar at the top, or move the map to a location to bring up the right area. The current day's weather is displayed, along with sunrise and sunset times, and then rising and setting times, as well as overhead and underfoot times for the moon. Scrolling down from there, you have three options. On the forecasting sub-tab, you'll see the deer movement prediction, which will either be core area, transition area, or full range for daylight movement of general deer, as well as whether that movement would be normal or abnormal, or very abnormal. And at the end of this video, I'll dive a little bit deeper into the data science and methodology to explain where this information comes from, the accuracy, and what it actually means for us as hunters. Let's next look at the upcoming weather forecast. Temperature and pressure are graphically displayed, and you can hold your finger down over the pressure graph and slide left and right to see the temperature, real feel, and barometric pressure output by the hour. But it's also handy just to be able to see the weekly trends at a high level. And then for the daily forecast, you can expand any one of the upcoming days to get additional hour-by-hour breakdowns of the weather, this time also including wind speed and direction, as well as precipitation chance. Again, just move that slider left and right to change the time. And at the very bottom of the page, you can look at the rut timing information for the area, which again is based on bell curve information to tell you what the peak of the bell curve is for that area. Remember, this peak breeding time isn't the best time necessarily to see cruising activity. That's generally 10 to 14 days before, or 5 to 6 days after that date, though that rutting activity will generally be more condensed time frame the further north you go, and it's more spread out over a longer time period the further south you go, where temperatures and snow don't play as much into fawn survival rate. If you move over to the historical sub-tab, you get detailed weather information over a specific time frame. The default is the last 2 weeks, but you can also choose the last 4 weeks, last 3 months, or even pick a specific month out of the year. I find that really helpful for out-of-state hunt planning to see the most likely wind directions and temperature ranges for the time frame I'll be going. For instance, let's say I'm planning a hill country rut hunt in the month of November. I can use this information to focus my efforts on just that month to see the most likely leeward ridges based on the most common wind directions that time of year for that specific location, and spend less time e-scouting spots that are less likely to be leeward ridges if that's what I wanted to focus on. Lastly, if you click on the Intel sub-tab, you can get high-level information about the state you're looking at. This will include land information, public land percentages, deer and hunter statistics, which will vary just by how much data that particular state collects. Also in that Intel sub-tab, you can tap on Browse, which will list common natural food sources prevalent in the state. It isn't totally comprehensive, but it can be a great place to help start your research. Next, we'll move over to the journaling tab of the app. The intent here is to make journaling something that's convenient for you to do and centrally located. When you add a journal entry, you'll be able to add the location and the time for the entry. That will automatically tie into the weather information for that time frame. And you can write in whatever notes you find pertinent for that day's hunt. Most likely your phone's keyboard will have a talk to text option. In that case, you'd just be able to talk right into your phone instead of having to type everything out. Note though that usually, at least on my phone, it doesn't capture everything quite perfectly, but it is an option. Back to the main journal entry screen, you can choose whether or not you want to add a waypoint specific to that journal entry. That way when you click on it in the map, it would pull up that journal entry screen. And you can add in additional information if you want, like what weapon you used and specifics about what deer you saw. You can also attach as many photos as you want to that journal entry. And then one additional way you'd be able to use this journaling tab would be to look up the weather information for a past trail camera photo. You just input the time and location of the photo to see what the weather conditions were at the time it was taken. And last but certainly not least is the map. I'll show the mapping features as they currently stand, but also realize that this is the tab which will continue to have the most added features as the app continues to evolve. So I'll also talk about things that are currently in the works. There are 4 different viewing options to swipe through. One is satellite, one is topo, a hybrid mode, an agricultural map, and one with property ownership. The goal of the satellite map was to try and use a provider that had the most leaf-off imagery wherever possible for the most amount of available areas. Some areas are better than others. The agricultural map shows more of a summertime color palette, but can provide different contrast to look through and compare against. I'll show a few examples here. This is an area just outside of Nashville. You can see that in this area, along with many other areas that happen to be close to major metropolitan areas, the detail is phenomenal. And in this case, it's leaf-off imagery as well. The agricultural layer then just provides a different look. Here's a different area where you get to see the extreme detail, but it's not leaf-off. And here's an example of a bigger woods type area where the detail is just average, but you do get that leaf-off imagery so the transitions stand out more, especially between deciduous and coniferous trees. And then here's a really zoomed out example of a bigger woods area with leaf-off imagery, again, allowing pines and other evergreens to pop. Here's a close-up of that same exact area and what it looks like with the agricultural layer for contrast, and an extreme close-up. Here's an example of a cattail marsh in an area that has really high detail, and that same place with the ag layer. And then here's a different cattail marsh area that doesn't have that extreme detail, and then the ag layer of that same spot. There are a couple things that are also worth mentioning when it comes to map quality. One is that they're currently testing the ability to import pay-to-download satellite imagery. In other words, a third-party satellite company has taken images over certain dates and timeframes and resolutions. You'd be able to draw a box around the area you want, choose from the available imagery that they have, and then pay to download that tile, which would just vary based on how big the size is, along with other information like NDVI. These images might not be extreme resolution, but they can provide value in other ways. For example, here's an area we can look at. This is what the standard satellite layer looks like in the app, and here's the ag layer. And then here's that same area with a wintertime custom satellite photo. And then here's a more recent photo showing logging activity that's not present on basically any other map. Spartan Forge also plans on, in the future, adding the ability to allow a user to task a satellite to take a specific photo of a certain area and time. On the topo map side of things, one of the things that's also being worked on right now is LiDAR. That should eventually present itself both as a LiDAR layer, which shows an extreme amount of detail and shaded relief, but also would allow the topo lines to have a much tighter resolution as well. Here's an example of kind of what LiDAR looks like in comparison to the topo maps you're normally used to seeing. Oftentimes this data is collected by state or county governments. For mapping functionality, you can either have north always pointing up or use orienteering mode, which will always point the direction your phone is pointed. You can also record your track while you're out in the field. The compass icon can be displayed in either the left or the right side of the screen. To move it, long tap on the compass and then just slide it over to the other side. Hit the GPS icon at any time to go to your current position, and use the search bar to quickly move to other cities. To place a waypoint, long tap where you want the icon to go. Waypoints are grouped by category: animal-specific, food, scouting, terrain, structural icons. Recently used icons will also show up in the Recent tab. You can pick from various colors, attach images and notes. Some of the icons have subcategories. For instance, there's a trail camera icon, but then there's also a scrape trail cam, rub trail cam, and bedding trail cam icon in case you don't want to stack two waypoints right together in the same spot. The tool tab is currently being updated to allow for things like drawing lines and polygons. The property boundary layer is also not yet in its final implementation. Certainly the information is there, but expect that to get much more intuitive and easy to read over time. In addition, there's a feature that should be out likely in the next couple of weeks called Blue Force Tracker. That terminology comes from the military, but you can simply think of it as the ability to share waypoints and current locations with other people in your group. It could be used as a one-time share feature to send a bunch of waypoints to a friend all at once, or you could create a shared area to have continually shared information for everyone in your group. If desired, the group owner would be able to turn on location tracking for the people in the group so that you can see where each other are at and aren't constantly running into one another. Of course, the group owner could also choose to leave that off so you don't know where everybody's at. Anyways, that's a brief overview. A couple of other quick comments. Pricing for the beta release is $29.99. Would be a price for life option for everything that's kind of shown here. The number of beta versions is planned to be capped, again, just to kind of stress test the scalability before full-scale launch. If you had already been paying for the Spartan Forge service online, you're already in and part of that program and are locked into whatever price you paid for that for life. Once this moves from beta to production, the pricing structure is likely to change again. And if you do use the code DIY, you will get a discount. And Full disclosure to you guys, the viewers, I do receive a small kickback if that code is used. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the data science behind the prediction, where it comes from, how it works, the tested accuracy, and what it can and can't tell us as hunters. Positional data from GPS-collared deer studies across the country is fed into a computer system called a neural network. Let's briefly just look at one point in time for consideration. Information is analyzed in the context of a bunch of different inputs: temperature, pressure, moon, wind, location in the country, etc. A long list. There's a massive amount of calculations to try and compare input and output relationships. Computationally, this would take a human a massive amount of time. Now expand that not to just one deer, but thousands of deer, and not just one point in time, but cumulatively decades of time, millions of total data points. It's impossible to do on pen and paper, but the neural network works through that information to try and identify patterns, and then it uses those identified patterns to apply the most likely future outcome based on the conditions upcoming. That's then bucketed into three potential options: core area, transition area, and full range. Core area prediction would mean that the general deer is likely to spend their daylight hours within their smaller core area around their bedding. Transition area would mean that the general deer is likely to expand out a ways beyond that core area during daylight hours. And then full range would of course mean a much larger range of movement during daylight. Accuracy for these predictions can and is quantified whenever there's new study data available. The prediction is used to estimate what will happen for that study time frame, and then it's compared against what actually happened in the GPS study. And right now, the prediction accuracy ranges in that 60 to 70% range, just depending on the state. The movement type, being normal, abnormal, or very abnormal, is up in the 70 to 80% range. With each new data set that's ingested into the neural network, that accuracy does drive a little bit higher. It'll never be 100%, and the reason for that is just as simple as the fact that deer are wild animals, and sometimes they don't do what they do most often. And there are also other variables like irregular hunter pressure or a dog that runs through a bedding area that could impact what happens on any given specific day. Another way to think of this is that if the app predicts a core area movement, about 2/3 of the time, that's exactly how most of the deer move that day. And if the app predicts full range, then about 2/3 of the time, that's how the deer will move throughout that day, again, in the context of things like hunting pressure. Now, another really great question is, what happens when we're trying to look at mature bucks specifically, let's say 5 years old and older? The prediction on the app doesn't single them out, it's telling you what the general deer is doing, but I've talked to Bill quite extensively about this and what he's seeing in the GPS data that he's looked at. Basically, when you do try and single out those older deer, it would make it seem as if there was a core area prediction almost every single day of the year with a handful of exceptions throughout the fall, which again goes to show you why they're so hard to target and hunt, and sort of validates many of our own personal observations as hunters. That said, they do tend to move more on days where there's a transition area or full range prediction. The difference is that they're oftentimes just up and moving more within the context of their core area, walking around more, getting up to browse and shift beds more, and just covering more distance within that small area, which again could still be really useful information if you've done the scouting to know how you might be able to slip in and make a game plan accordingly. Bottom line, don't use the prediction as an excuse not to scout or put in work. It's my firm belief that people who are able to put more time in and more effort into an endeavor will still generally be the ones who are most consistently finding success. Rather, use it as a tool to help your day-to-day decision making, just like how other tools like e-scouting or trail cameras can be used to supplement boots on the ground. Hopefully this video helps with some of the more common questions that people have around deer movement predictions in general and Spartan Forge's method in particular. If you have any other questions, please drop them in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to answer or find someone who would know the answer. Thanks for watching.